The Minnesota Timberwolves have been one of the best teams in the NBA during the opening of the NBA season. At 5-2, they've beaten both the Denver Nuggets and the Boston Celtics at home, and at the time that we're recording this video, have allowed the fewest points per game. However, this hot start may cause one of their top players and franchise mainstays to become expendable, or even necessary to trade in order to reach the next level. Now, I know that sounds absurd, but hear me out. For the past 8 seasons, Karl-Anthony Towns has been the face of a Timberwolves era that steered Minnesota back to the playoffs, but no further than the first round. In order for this Timberwolves team to win their first playoff series in 2 decades, Cat will need to quickly turn around his slow start fast. Otherwise, Minnesota's best option may be to trade their longest tenured player before he can witness the fruits of his team's long rebuild. So before we get to the content, make sure you drop a like, subscribe, and turn on our notifications to help the channel grow. Now, was that a f***ing termite? Do I have f***ing termites? Are you f***ing... bitch. Leading up to the season, I spammed predictions at you guys consistently. Michael Porter Jr. needed over 5.5 rebounds in his season debut. Tyreek Hill just needed a touchdown, and Steph Curry just needed 1 point. Shout out to those that tailed. For those of you guys that were able to make money, we're giving away our picks for free all season long for the NBA and NFL on my Instagram at TheFlightMike. And right now, when you use promo code microphone on Prize Picks, they'll match your deposit up until $100. Thank you, Prize Picks, for the sponsor. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? After 1 season at Kentucky, Karl-Anthony Towns became the Minnesota Timberwolves' newest franchise player, and Minnesota drafted him first overall in the 2015 NBA draft. He quickly showed the world that he could be a franchise cornerstone, averaging a double-double on the way to unanimously winning Rookie of the Year. His outside shooting at 7 feet tall instantly made him one of the league's best offensive bigs, as Karl-Anthony Towns teamed up with fellow #1 overall pick and highly touted prospect Andrew Wiggins to form a high-scoring duo that Minnesota hoped could spearhead the team's first trip to the NBA playoffs since Kevin Garnett led the Timberwolves to the 2004 Western Conference Finals. While Cat's numbers went up with a higher volume in his second year, Minnesota didn't come close to making the playoffs in either of his first 2 seasons. However, prior to his 3rd season, the Minnesota Timberwolves swung a blockbuster trade to acquire Jimmy Butler, who was perceived to be the missing piece for the Minnesota Timberwolves. NBA general managers even picked Karl-Anthony Towns in a preseason poll as the best player to build around over players like LeBron James, Joel Embiid, Kevin Durant, and Russell Westbrook. And at the time, that wasn't that bold of a take. The Minnesota Timberwolves even proved them right, winning 47 games, a 16-win improvement from the previous season. But in a razor-thin Western Conference, they needed every last one. On the final day of the regular season, Minnesota faced Denver in a winner-go-home scenario, with the winner clinching the West's last playoff spot. Bear in mind, this was before the play-in tournament. The Minnesota Timberwolves won in an overtime thriller, and Karl-Anthony Towns had a huge game that proved why he was next up in the NBA. And 2018 became the year that Minnesota finally ended their 14-year playoff drought. The sky was the limit for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Although they lost in 5 games to Houston in the opening round, the Wolves have taken a huge step forward as an organization, and Karl-Anthony Towns had a lot to do with their success. With Jimmy Butler in the fold, Cat had fewer touches during the year, but posted his most efficient season of his career while earning his first All-Star nod and All-NBA selection. In the offseason, the Minnesota Timberwolves rewarded him as such by giving him a 5-year, $190 million Supermax contract extension. And then, just like that, things would become a disaster for the Timberwolves. I mean, this was an absolute nightmare for them, because during the beginning of the next season, the Minnesota Timberwolves would deal with a Jimmy Butler trade saga that to this day, his former teammates still talk about.
Jimmy ain't came to no workout. So workout start in September, we don't see Jimmy. Nobody's talking. Jimmy decides to show up. We start training camp. He comes 3 days after training camp starts. We all think Jimmy about to practice. Like, Jimmy want a new contract. Jimmy want a new contract. We think Jimmy gonna practice. Jimmy ain't practice. Jimmy laying on there getting stretched out. Dave said, we're gonna scrimmage. Jimmy hop up. I'm playing. Jimmy said, I ain't playing with them. Jimmy said, I'm playing with them. He picked the bad news Bears. It was there, no offense, but everybody in there, they wasn't gonna make the team. He's like, I'm playing with them. We playing first game. He's like, I got Cat. I was like, oh shit. So Jimmy and Cat ain't like each other. That's another part of the story I get to one. We throw it to Cat first play. Jimmy steal it. Go down, score. They go down, score. Like, come on, Cat, post his little ass. What's up, man? He can't guard you, blah, blah, blah. Jimmy like, get out of here. He trash. Da-da-da-da. Steal the ball again. They go down and score. Jimmy start talking to the GM. Everybody in the gym. Y'all better mother effing pay me. I'm like that. I'm like, he is nuts. Jimmy ain't scored at all. He just stealing the ball and passing to people, getting assists, just playing the right way. But he like doing everything. Time run out. They win. They beat us like 18-6, right? And Jimmy going crazy. Y'all think that team can win without me? I'm him. Pay me. Mind you, he ain't took off his Jordan warm-up yet, right? He finally takes it off. He got the Timberwolves shirt on, but he cut the Minnesota out so it's just chest. He out here with a hole in the middle of his shirt, in the middle of his leg. So I'm crying now. Yo, I'm crying. I'm like, he like, I just beat them with the G League. This is your starters? So now I'm laughing. I'm still crying, laughing, but I'm like, hold on, he talking about me. Yeah, nigga. So I'm mad now. To me, all of us like, nah, F that. Like, we got to play again. So Tim's like, nope, second unit, you got them. They beat the second unit. So we turned up. We all on sideline. Yeah, hey, come on, let's go. Yeah, motherfucker, we talking crazy. Jimmy just darts to the locker room. So we play the second unit. We beat him. We all run the locker room like, Jimmy, bring your back out here. We want to play again. Jimmy gone. We go in the locker room. ESPN pop up.
You know what time it is?
Rachel Nichols, Jimmy Butler on TV. We like, what the He like, yeah, I just killed them at practice and I think they all good players. We like, what? Hold on. I can't make this up, bro. He came and killed us.
And dipped on y'all.
And did an interview at home. One of the most iconic moments I've ever been a part in basketball, bro. How you set up an interview knowing you about to kill?
But despite this, Minnesota believed that karl-Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins would be the cornerstones of the franchise. If they were going to make it to the NBA playoffs and eventually the NBA finals, it's going to be because of their back-to-back #1 overall picks, not because of Jimmy Butler. And following this, they would have a great season in 2018 to 2019 with another all-star campaign. But with Jimmy Butler gone, the Minnesota Timberwolves regressed mightily and once again missed the playoffs. After missing just 5 games over his first 4 seasons, Cat began to miss significant time, playing in only 85 games over the first 2 seasons of his Supermax extension. Knee and wrist injuries kept him off the court during the 2019 to 2020 season before the COVID-19 shutdown. Cat faced unimaginable tragedy during this time, losing his mother and 7 other family members to the COVID-19 pandemic. When he finally got back to basketball, Cat suffered another wrist injury and had to miss more games because of his own COVID diagnosis. During this 2-year period, Minnesota barely sniffed the postseason and even made one of the most ridiculed trades of the past decade, trading Andrew Wiggins to the Golden State Warriors for a trade package surrounding D'Angelo Russell, quite literally gifting the Golden State Warriors an extension to their dynasty. But losing karl-Anthony Towns for long stretches, in addition to the team just being significantly worse, allowed Minnesota to tank and land the #1 overall pick in the 2020 NBA draft, which they used to select Georgia's Anthony Edwards. And in 2021 to 2022, with an emerging Anthony Edwards and a healthy karl-Anthony Towns, each averaging over 20 points per night, Minnesota finally put it all together to win 46 games and go back to the playoffs after a 3-season hiatus before losing in the first round to Memphis in 6 games. You probably are more familiar with This Moment by Patrick Beverley than the fact that the Minnesota Timberwolves would lose to Memphis following that. But regardless, Cat was an all-star and an all-NBA selection once again. It looked like he had another young co-star who could lead the team for years to come. The Timberwolves front office decided that Cat and Edwards were a dynamic duo worth going all in for. And in their first move of the 2022 offseason, the Timberwolves once again signed karl-Anthony Towns to a 4-year, $224 million Supermax extension, tying him to the team until 2028. Less than 24 hours later, they made a seismic trade signaling their intent to go all in on their core of karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards, trading Malik Beasley, Patrick Beverley, Leandro Bolmaro, Walker Kessler, Jared Vanderbilt, 4 first-round picks, and a pick swap to the Utah Jazz for Rudy Gobert, a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, a 3-time All-Star, and a 6-time First-Team All-Defensive Player. Gobert's addition signaled to the NBA world that the Minnesota Timberwolves believed that they were ready to contend now. And the first question that everybody had, myself included, was how would Gobert and Cat coexist in the front court? The two bigs have extremely different skill sets, which the team believed would help balance the oddities of playing 2 centers in the current NBA. But coming out of the gate in 2022 to 2023, the results were a mixed bag. The Timberwolves weren't exactly lighting the world on fire, hovering around 500 during the first month and a half of the season. Gobert's integration hadn't been going smoothly with the team playing inconsistently early on. But Minnesota's season completely changed in late November when Cat went down with a non-contact injury. A road loss to the Wizards, which ended up being a serious calf strain, and while his initial timeline placed his possible return in January, he ended up sidelined until late March. This made it 3 out of 4 seasons that Towns ended up missing significant time with an injury. Meanwhile, with Cat off the floor, Anthony Edwards became the primary scorer, a first-time All-Star, and had arguably the greatest season ever by a Minnesota guard. The Timberwolves stayed around 500 for the rest of the season, and when Cat came back to play 8 more games, Minnesota was in the thick of the play-in race. They ended up getting into the play-in, although there was some controversy towards the end in the form of a fight between Kyle Anderson and Rudy Gobert, but they would get into the playoffs as the 8th seed and played the Nuggets fairly close. The Timberwolves went down to the eventual champions in 5 games, but 4 were decided by single digits, including Minnesota's overtime win in Game 4 to extend the series. Edwards took over on this night, going toe-to-toe with Nikola Jokic, while Cat ended up fouling out in overtime. Later in the summer, former Nugget Bruce Brown said that Minnesota was their toughest series on their way to a championship, in large part because of how difficult it was to guard Anthony Edwards. Their postseason performance was encouraging, but the Timberwolves clearly have a ways to go to become a true championship contender. Plus, their biggest question entering the season wasn't really answered. Cat only ended up playing in 29 games, making it hard to call his pairing with Gobert a definitive success or failure in year 1. There are questions about whether Anthony Edwards and Gobert disliked each other. So Minnesota's top priority in 2023 was clear: re-sign Anthony Edwards, which they were able to do almost immediately. Edwards signed a 5-year contract extension worth up to $260 million, and essentially the Timberwolves let the NBA know that Anthony Edwards was their guy, going all in on Edwards, Cat, and Gobert, with all 3 on massive contracts. With no assets for the future, this was going to be the Minnesota Timberwolves team for the foreseeable future. Now, entering the season, Minnesota's hope was that Edwards would continue his rise as a scorer. Anthony Edwards had a dominant performance for Team USA in the summertime, and although he was already confident as a basketball player, working with Steve Kerr and being the primary scorer for Team USA only added fuel to the fire. Minnesota was hoping that Edwards would continue his rise as a scorer, Gobert would have a better year this year than his last year, and that Karl-Anthony Towns would stay on the court. And 7 games into the season, all 3 have been happening, and the Minnesota Timberwolves have looked great, particularly at home. Currently, Minnesota is undefeated on their home floor, including blowouts over last year's finals participants, Denver and Miami, and a thrilling overtime win against Boston. The win over the Celtics in particular showed just how far Anthony Edwards had come. He took complete control over Minnesota's offense in the 4th quarter and overtime on their way to handing Boston their first loss in a playoff-like atmosphere. Karl-Anthony Towns only played 28 minutes because he fouled out, firmly putting Ant in the driver's seat on offense, and it turned out pretty well for Minnesota. We're getting more evidence every game that Anthony Edwards is the real deal, and it's no longer a stretch to say he's not only their best player, but also Minnesota's face of the franchise. Those titles used to belong to Towns for years, unchallenged by anyone other than Jimmy Butler's brief tenure. But this season has been a different story. Although it's a small sample size, Karl-Anthony Towns is averaging career lows across the board in most major statistical categories, including a significant drop in shooting efficiency. This is not to say that he's been playing terribly. He had a great shooting night in their win over New Orleans, and he's averaging close to a double-double. However, when looking at his upcoming contract, you might expect more than what Towns has produced so far this season. Cat's extension that he signed last summer doesn't even kick in until next season, but it's already looking unsettling. His salary will increase from just shy of $50 million and escalate over the next 3 seasons, culminating in a $61 million player option when he's 31. Ant's extension will kick in at the same time, while Gobert has 2 more years after this season, including a player option worth around $46 million when he's 33. That's 3 players taking up a massive chunk of Minnesota's payroll, and the one who seems the most replaceable appears to be Karl-Anthony Towns, because he's not shooting the ball particularly well, and he's playing far below his standards, and the Timberwolves have clearly been flowing more through Edwards. Gobert has been having a much better start to the season, anchoring to the league's stingiest defense. Naz Reid, who the Minnesota Timberwolves re-signed over the summertime, looks like an early contender for 6th Man of the Year with his efficient, consistent scoring and defensive performance. He has been proved crucial this season to Minnesota's early rise and flashing a lot of the same offensive production in a similar way that Cat did earlier in his career as a big who can stretch the floor. In other words, the Timberwolves have a player who is more versatile on defense and can do a lot of what Cat does on offense while costing significantly less. Deal Dealing karl-Anthony Towns could help the Timberwolves bring back players that can help now, but also recoup lost assets from the Gobert trade, which can be flipped to land someone big like Pascal Siakam or Jeremy Grant, or as time goes on, anyone who they believe would fit on the Minnesota Timberwolves. There are early signs that this Wolves team can make the playoffs comfortably rather than barely squeaking in, which is speaking volumes considering how deep the Western Conference is. Now that Cat is back on the court for now, and the Wolves are good, trading him might be going against the if it ain't broke don't fix it line of thought. However, if Ant continues to rise to superstardom and Cat continues playing below his expectations, trading him and his mammoth contract might be what the Timberwolves need to do to truly contend now. So let me know in the comment section down below, what should the Minnesota Timberwolves do with karl-Anthony Towns? Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.